Please welcome Taylor Renee Aldridge, writer and curator.
Good evening, friends and colleagues. It is a pleasure to be here tonight to celebrate the work of Eileen Harris Norton and the book that documents a small fraction of her impact. I also feel it necessary to share that while I am holding a lot of joy, I'm also holding a lot of grief. My heart and mind are with the people of Palestine, those who have recently sought shelter in what was supposed to be a safe area of Rafah, only to be bombed indiscriminately in their temporary home tents. As we gather to talk about a book titled All These Liberations, which celebrates the many liberations women artists of color have advocated for and insisted upon within their work, I cannot stand here without also advocating for the freedom and safety of innocent civilians in Palestine. The artworks featured in Eileen's collection are not apolitical. They are self-referential, rooted in deep inquiry and critical insurgency. For example, I am thinking about the 1970s work of Senga Ngugi in Eileen's collection, which engages with malleable forms to convey abstracted reflections of used bodies. In another work in the collection with a cow bladder and surgical thread, Doris Salcedo enshrines the tattered shoes of people who have been disappeared by paramilitary groups and guerrilla groups in the 1980s Colombia. I consider the lino cut entitled The Exhorters by Ruth Waddy the first work purchased by Eileen per the suggestion of her mother, which could be read as a representation of Waddy's own critiques about zealots who emerged within the civil rights and Black arts movement era. What I appreciate greatly about Eileen's collection is that the works and artists included do not shy away from political upheaval and the urgencies needed to resolve them. Throughout the making of this book, Black feminist thought was a toolbox I pulled from often. It was in a call with scholar and curator Oluremi C. Anabanjo early in the process where she encouraged me to lean into and being guided by poetry in addition to art historical significance of Eileen's collection. Audre Lorde's poem, Who Said It Was Simple, informed the title of the book. In it, she addressed how early feminism and Black power movements were not considerate or inclusive of Black women. There is a Dion Brand excerpt in the epigraph of my introductory essay in the book, taken from the book, The Blue Clerk, where she writes, quote, modernity can spread a bed of weaponry to what it calls the far reaches of the globe, but it cannot spread women's equality. It cannot stem the liquidity of capital. It cannot even feed its own populations, but female bodies are still trophy to tradition and culture. These two poems characterize works by women artists in Eileen's collection, but also gesture to broader considerations around how we define womanhood within society and culture. I am in deep gratitude for the contributions featured in the book, which extend on the legacies of transnational feminisms, while also looking to the future around what works in Eileen's collection could mean for worlds of climate disaster, continued imperialist occupation, and expanded notions of gendered self-making. The women artists in Eileen's collection represent not only much needed shifts of women of color and their narratives moving from the margins into the mainstream, but an archive of lived material experience that is palpable and redolent of a history that continues to repeat itself. Eileen's story shows us how important it is not only to collect works by artists, but to also support the ecosystems that enable an artist's survival, like underwriting daring exhibitions that push the boundaries of the mainstream, championing emerging voices in the field, and endowing professorships to ensure more expansive and inclusive pedagogies and traditional academic spaces. It has been a great honor to platform the work of Eileen, and I hope her impact continues to have ripple effects on future generations of collectors and patrons to come. So with that said, I want to introduce the incomparable Darren Walker, and he will then introduce the speakers for tonight. Thank you so much.
So, I am holding a special treat. All these liberations, women artists in the Eileen Harris Norton collection. You'll each get this gift when you leave. But the real gift will be to experience two remarkable, brilliant, amazing, indefatigable, badass black women who have, between the two of them, decades been my sheroes. And their journey together is part of the story that I will be moderating with great honor. Please join me in welcoming Eileen Harris Norton.
Alan, you made it.
And the director and chief curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem, Thelma Golden.
Sit.
So we are already going to church and the program has not started. Well,
Wow.
Thelma and Eileen, you both look ravishing this afternoon.
Thank you.
And your journey, because both of you are remarkably accomplished women, and I have to say black women because it is important to contextualize your ascent and your success because you each can share with the group assembled here your journey, and it is in many ways an understatement to say that each of you has been a trailblazer, a path breaker, a pathfinder, a light seeker. But we're going to talk about your relationship through the lens of this remarkable book. Thank you, Taylor, and all of the contributors, some of whom I see in this audience tonight.
Yes.
Because it is part memoir. I mean, it is, the collection of Eileen, but it is also a memoir. We're going to get into that part of it too. But I want to just start by having each of you talk about, because you've been friends for so long, how you met each other and how you encountered each other from where you, Eileen Harris Norton, collector, living on the West Coast, you, Thelma Golden, a curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art. So talk about that first encounter and the journey that began on that occasion. Eileen, would you like to go first, please?
Certainly. First, I'd like to do some thank yous. Thank you to Mr. Walker and the wonderful Ford Foundation team that has brought us here together. And of course, Thelma, my friend of many years. And of course, to Taylor Aldridge for making the book happen. Sophia Belsheim, my collection manager and director of art and practice. We'll talk about art and practice too. She and I were trying to make a book, but we didn't know how to make a book. And we asked Taylor to join us, and she pulled the works together, found the scholars and writers to make it a real document, to make it a real educational document that we can share with schools and colleges and everyone. It's not just about me and my collection, it's about the works and the themes that the artists were making. So thank you. And Thelma, when did we meet?
Well, we met in 1992. I was a curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Had just become a curator there the year before. I was working for the amazing David Ross, who was director of the Whitney at that time. And alongside my colleagues, Elizabeth Sussman, Lisa Phillips, and John Hanhart, we were working on what became the 93 biennial. And in that biennial, which sought to open up many, many different conversations, we kept encountering artists who, of course, were inspiring to us for the exhibition, who were already collected by Eileen and her husband at that time. We kept seeing either credit lines, in exhibitions, or the artists themselves. And so, of course, this is a pre-internet moment. So I guess I knew who Eileen was, but I cannot tell you what it was like the first time I met her. Right? When Eileen walked into the room, incandescent, as she always is. As she always is. And for me, as at the time a 27-year-old curator, in my first real big job, to see a woman, a Black woman, who was a collector, a philanthropist, but who approached me with so much love and compassion from the first moment. It truly, when you describe us equally as path breakers and change, I would not be that without Eileen. Like, all of what I was able to do was made possible in many ways by the kind of mentoring of what it meant to navigate, right, the art world of that moment that came from Eileen. Shortly after that, we began to see each other primarily around art and artists. There were so many artists that we lived in the world with. And so that's what really formed our relationship.
That's right.
And Eileen, who said to me, well, I really don't like to talk. You've come to the right place. Here on the stage with me.
And Thelma.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
This is where you need to be. Eileen, you didn't start thinking, I'm going to be the Black Peggy Guggenheim. I am going to be the one to truly transform how collectors think about Black art. Because there weren't any when Thelma met you, and you were already collecting these artists, many of whom were unknown, were really rather obscure.
Yes.
So did you think, okay, I'm going to be the Black Peggy Guggenheim. I'm going to have a book. And
No. Simply put, no. The story. Okay, we'll give you a story. My former husband and I, we just fell into collecting art. We had no art history background. We had no art background. We lived in Venice Beach, California, and there were artists just living in the neighborhood at the time. This is in the early 80s. Well, I've known Thelma many years, but even before that, I met my former husband, and we would just be in the neighborhood, and there would be storefronts, artist studios, and we just met people and fell into spaces, and eventually there was, well, I think L.A. Louver was in Venice in the late 70s, early 80s, and Loring Augustine came to Venice, early 80s, I think. But we didn't know.
But
Loring
art wasn't new for
Augustine.
you. Your
I know,
mother
but-
introduced you to art, and you were, as a child,
Well,
going
yes.
to galleries and to opera
It's
and
just-
theater. And
All of that, yeah. I grew up in a home with my grandfather, who loved opera and loved singing, and I had two gay uncles who loved opera and loved.
like we all do.
I mean, they were into theater and music and
Yes.
everything. And then my mother would take me to theater and to art shows. We'd go to the Laguna Beach Art Festival. I mean, well, I was a child, so I didn't know. But they were always pushing me, well, not pushing me, but exposing me and showing me art. And, we went to the theater and I was experiencing art. It was a long time before I realized. But then in 1976, my mom and I saw an article in an ad in the LA Times of an artist named Ruth Waddy, who was going to be exhibiting her work at the California African American, no, it wasn't the California, was it? Oh, thank you, Taylor. African American Museum, which was on the top floor of a department store that my mom and I used to go to all the time, and we had no idea that there was a museum on the top floor. So we went, and there was Ruth Waddy making lithographs and showing her work in the museum space. And, we talked to her, and she showed us and explained to us what she was doing. I mean, we had no idea what, making a lithograph was, and, the process. And here she was, this older Black woman, making this art. And, the space was just full of this art. And so, we looked at it and enjoyed it. And my mom said, well, you've got to buy something from the lady.
A familiar pattern.
A familiar pattern. That my mom was an older Black woman, and she sees this older Black woman. She's like, oh, you got to help the lady out. So I did, and the piece I bought, as Taylor mentioned, the Exhorters, and the piece shows a man speaking to a crowd. And I don't know, I guess because I was in the education program at UCLA, and, so teaching and education were always big themes in my family. So I bought that piece, and so that was the first piece. And, but no, I had no idea if I was going to have an art collection. So, it was years later when I met my then husband that, we sort of lived in an area, and there was tons of artists in the area, and we had no money. So we didn't think about buying any art. We were buying old master prints, things that we had seen in museums, and just thought, oh yeah, I've seen that in a museum, something similar to that. Oh yeah, we even bought a very bad copy of a 100 Gilder print. And, but here were all these living, working artists that, we could meet on the street. And, I had met Mrs. Waddy. So eventually, when we had some money, we bought a piece by an artist, a woman named Carla Payaro, in a downtown LA art studio tour that we used to go to. And we befriended her, and
You were off to the races.
we were off to the races little by little. Like I said, we had no money, but we had enough to buy something from her. And as you probably can imagine, that the art world was very different then than it is today.
Well, and you were like over lunch yesterday, like with Agnes Gondel, we were talking with Aggie about those early days when you could buy some. When you were a pioneering collector, you're not buying a Mark Bradford for $3 million. You're there on the front end. You're on the front end before the artist is famous and before
Exactly.
they've got Hauser and Wirth, and
Yes.
so you were buying at that time. Thelma, when you say that Eileen had this impact on you and your career, so you truly were a singular. I mean, there were no other black curators. Often, curators have collectors and patrons who are on the board or who support their leadership and their development as curators. But there weren't many for you because there weren't many black collectors, board members in this milieu. How did your experience with Eileen in this regard shape your career trajectory?
Well, in so many ways. I mean, the first I've already said, just her example was an inspiration. And watching her move through the art world of that moment, gave me so much of a possibility bottle of what I could do. But then also very specifically, we did a lot of looking and learning together because her commitment to artists, not just acquiring their work, but the artists themselves, was something that informed the way I engage with artists. So Eileen's desire always to connect with everyone as people, right? With real grace, with real humility, that she exemplifies. Also, what was important in that moment was the way in which she supported, right, these ambitions that I had and that I knew I wanted to pursue, and having someone. I remember, you might not remember this, I remember my parents were so eager to meet Eileen because when they sort of heard and understood the ways in which she'd been showing up for me, they were like, we want to meet this person. And I don't know what they expected, but what I remember so clearly was the sense of recognition that you had with them and they had with you in their sense of gratitude of what it meant as they understood the world I was in, that Eileen was there. So Darren, it was so many ways, and it really informed the way in which I understood myself.
And I would imagine that there were many times the two of you would be the only black women in the room.
Many. No, without question. And that's why often, I can remember in those days, early days of art fairs, and, the gallery world wasn't what it is today. I mean, there weren't as many, but there were. And I remember we would go places, and people would call us by name, and Eileen would say, how do they know? And I would be like, Eileen. Like, yeah. There was no question that they always knew that, it was us. And so
Yes.
I think that, yes, it was such a different time and such a different moment. But it also was one that was filled with the possibility of what I think this moment was. So that in the year between my time at the Whitney and the Studio Museum, I got to work as a colleague to Susan Kahan, who is running the foundation at that time, who made it possible for me to be a special projects curator. And in that year, I was able to engage with artists and ideas in a way that I know planted some of the seeds for what I would do when I got to the Studio Museum. So there are, many ways that I think of that moment and Eileen's impact. And even, again, like I didn't know the story about the Ruth Waddy until much later, but it made complete sense to me, right? That her collection started with a black woman artist, someone who we know as an artist, but also who was an important curator and arts administrator, right? And why Ruth Waddy always stood as an example for me, but that would be Eileen's sort of grounding in art, right? Through a real idea of legacy.
Well, and speaking of grounding, one of the things you have remained is grounded. I mean, you still are Eileen Harris from Watts. And talk about, Eileen Harris from Watts.
Yes, I'm pointing at a certain someone in the audience because my mother worked at Thrifty's, which was his Rite Aid
Rite Aid or
now.
CVS.
Yeah. I mean, my grandfather and my uncles worked at the post office. And we lived in Watts, I grew up in the house that my mom and my uncles and my grandfather lived in, So, yeah, I grew up in Watts. We were always going out to other places, like I said, Laguna Beach, or going downtown to the music center or some place to experience art and culture. But
you were fortunate.
this is
But you were
this is
fortunate.
who I am.
Of course. This is who you are. But you were also very fortunate because you had this enabling environment.
Yes.
You had
Yes.
your grandparents, you had your mother, your father, your gay uncles. You were
The gay uncles.
You were thrust into a world you did not even understand.
No.
But that would ultimately leave an indelible mark on
Right.
your development as both a person, obviously, but also as a connoisseur of art.
Yes, just by osmosis. I mean, it was a long time. I never studied art or, yeah,
Like Peggy Guggenheim. This
Oh.
is my point. I mean, the best artists, the best art collectors don't start as art historians, but they start with a passion. Thelma, you and Eileen, in some ways, when you talk about all those studio visits that you did and all the artists you met together, you brought a lot of that with you because you then go on to the Studio Museum.
yeah.
And you and our dear Lowry turned the Studio Museum, as I recall, because I was working in Harlem at the time, and really introduced an idea that really supercharged the Studio Museum, that we Harlem residents who had known the Studio Museum. We could just start with the F's, the shows, because so many of those artists
Right.
were artists you discovered with Eileen. You've been on the journey with Eileen. Talk about that dynamic and the curatorial kind of work that you did that reflected that relationship and the learnings with Eileen.
Yes, well, they really came out in the idea that when I got to the Studio Museum in January of 2000 to work for Lowry Stokes Sims, a curator who, my commitment and understanding to history and art history came through, right? Lowry as a mentor. But I was deeply invested in what the Studio Museum could mean for living artists making work in the right now. And some of that came from the fact that I just spent those months looking at a lot of work, talking to a lot of artists, being engaged with artists, right, in the present. And that was happening a lot with Eileen. But it also was, my commitment to understanding what it would mean to work in a Black institution and what it could mean. I am almost positive, Eileen, that the first time I went to California African American, you took me there.
Oh, okay.
I can't imagine how else, in those years, I'm 100% positive that you took me to the California African American Museum. And so, my sense of what it meant now to work at a culturally specific museum, a Black institution, was also informed by what I saw in Eileen's commitment and pride in community, in where she was from, in South LA, and the way in which that then played out in the future as well. And so I think that is, a lot of what it was. When I first got to Studio Museum, Eileen joined our board, so she was, instrumental in what was the momentum of those early years when I was curator, which led to things like the F shows. But also it meant that, Eileen and I, could have a constant conversation about artists. So, it was very easy to imagine that in all that looking and engaging, that the talking about artists led in some cases to our shared commitment to some artists, many of whom are in this room tonight.
Yeah. Yes.
Indeed.
Indeed.
We have many famous artists in this room tonight. Indeed, we do. So, Eileen, for you, as you look at this book, and I just have to say, first of all, when I went to the index, I mean, it's the encyclopedia of every fabulous black artist living today, and some dead ones too. I mean,
Dead ones too.
I mean, first of all, I mean, the place of the artist. It is I mean, page after page after page. It is mind-boggling that you have all of this art. And when you thought about what you wanted this book to be, I mean, what you really wanted this to be, because it's certainly scholarly and has a kind of rigor to it that you would expect from an academic publication, but it's also very personal. And I love the way in which you just, it captures your own sort of linear trajectory and some of the works that have been seminal in your collection. But is this for you, I mean, this is the product. This is it.
Well, no, it's not it. Heaven forbid, no. These are only the women of color in my collection. I have many more pieces in my collection. And
Oh, we're gonna get like the white people in the Eileen Harris collection, the big book. That's gonna be the next book? The men in the Eileen Harris Norton collection?
we'll see. We'll see
Oh.
how it. We'll
I see. So now we're going to have a volume. This is going to be great. 'Cause I'm going to get you back here in 3 years.
Yeah.
There's going to be a volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. When you have that much art, this is what you have to do.
Well, I'd like to give a shout out to Taylor for honing this book. I mean, yes, I love this book. You know, I really do. I mean, you know,
It looks great.
and it looks, and I didn't coordinate. I
Yes,
really
that's
didn't.
Very coordinated.
But Taylor pulled and found the writers and the artists, you know, like Lorna and
Lorna Simpson's in the
Lorna
house.
Simpson in the house. You know, Kelly Jones, Sarah Lewis, I mean, Thelma Golden, I mean, and many others. Stephen Nelson wrote for this book. And I'd like to give a shout out to Yale Press for publishing it. Well, the book came out of an exhibition that we had at Art and Practice.
Oh, we're going to talk about the
We're gonna talk-
philanthropist
Yes.
Eileen Harris Norton now, then if we're going to talk about art and practice.
But first, I would like Eileen to talk a little bit about the exhibition, and only because I think for many of us, we waited a long time before Eileen would allow there to even be an exhibition or a book about her collection, right? Another way in which, but it's true. You know, I mean, and you say, like, this is women artists, but there are so many themes. When you
There are
look
many themes, yeah.
in the collection, so many pathways of the different ways in which Eileen has engaged with art and ideas. And so the exhibition, just even as a starting point, was one way to understand the way in which you thought about art and to see it in a public space. So can you talk about the exhibition, and then we can go on to the philanthropist.
Okay. The exhibition was opened at Art and Practice in January of 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020. But the exhibition was Collective Constellation, celebrating the 100th centennial of women's suffrage in the United States. Of course, you know, I couldn't have voted then, but women were able to vote in, 100 years ago. Anyway, the exhibition opened Aaron Cristobal of the Hammer Museum did a fabulous job, again, of, yay, Aaron, pulling together the pieces to make the show. And the show opened, but by March of 2020, the show had to close. So it sat there, and then we thought, you know, a year later, well, it's a good idea. We liked the show, and nobody got to really see and experience the ideas and the work. So then it became, okay, I could do a book. So that's how the book came about. And Sophia Belsheim, our director of art practice, and my collection manager, we contacted Taylor Aldridge, and she said, oh, yeah, let me do it. And she did a fabulous job of pulling the themes together and selecting the writers.
Indeed, she did, and
Yeah.
indeed, it's a great publication.
You know, and it wasn't supposed to be a memoir, but again, Sophia and Taylor felt, well, you know, you could tell your story along the way.
Do very well.
Yeah.
And part of that story is Eileen Harris Norton, the philanthropist, the arts philanthropist, and one of the most significant manifestations of that is art and practice. Why don't you tell us what art and practice
What is Art and Practice? Art and Practice is a foundation founded. My good friends, Mark Bradford and Alan DeCastro, and I founded it 10 years ago. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary. And Art and Practice, we started it to present world-class art exhibitions in Leimert Park, which is a section of Los Angeles, in South Los Angeles, an area that did not have any museums or galleries for real world-class art in the area, and supporting organization that helps foster youth who are aging out of the system in California, in the Los Angeles area. And now we even support organization that's working with refugee children. So that is Art and Practice. And so we have grown, and yeah, our 10th anniversary.
Yes, and I remember because you and Mark and Alan are partners in this, and you and Mark are very close. In fact, there is a funny story Mark told me that when he first encountered you at, you were with a group of collectors and fabulous people visiting his studio, and we all know that Mark has a history, and a vocational journey that has taken him from being a world-class beautician to being a world-class artist. But I recall that when Mark met you, he said, I need to fix your hair.
Yeah, he did. I did. Yeah, I mean, yes, I had long hair then, and we were visiting his studio, and Thelma had told me about this Mark Bradford because she was in town, had been scouting artists for freestyle. And I said, Mark Bradford, I haven't heard of him. So let me go visit Mark Bradford. So we did go visit Mark Bradford in his little hole in the wall. I mean, you know, his studio now is, you know.
An airplane, it's an airplane hangar.
You know, it's several times this space now, but then it was, you know, like, and, you know, and I was buying several pieces, you know. I said, oh, I want this and this and that. And he was like, oh, what did you say? And how much you got, or something like that. You know, I'm like.
That was the way he negotiated his, like, how much you got?
How much you got.
suffice it to say, again, I'm not going to speak for Mark, but again, I think Eileen's presence and her enthusiasm, all of those things probably came as a huge surprise.
Clean it up.
Right, in that moment. But it was an example of, again, in those days, the ways in which, you often collected deeply, right, in ways that
Yeah.
provided, artists with a real opportunity in that moment.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to continue this, but for those of you who have questions for Eileen or Thelma, on either side of the room, we have a microphone for you, and you'll be able to line up should you wish. So let's talk about today.
Yes.
Yes.
Because now both of you have moved in some ways from the margins. You were to center stage, if you will. And Eileen, in your case, you were collecting artists who many of whom were obscure, many of whom you were among the first purchasers of their work.
Yeah.
Thelma, you, of course, I think it's fair to say that your path-breaking Black Male show, which today is thought of as an iconic moment in the canon of art history, shall we say, was controversial and not universally admired when it was first presented.
That's right.
And so here you are both today in some ways vindicated in your fierce determination and your sensibility of what great art is. How does that feel?
How does that feel? I don't know. I mean, well, as I said, going from Ruth Waddy, who I didn't know anything about, and, come to learn that she was a great organizer and figure in the Black art community at the time, to meeting Thelma, a few years later, and then, then people like Mr. Bradford, my good friend. I met Glenn Ligon, I met Lorna Simpson, Carrie Mae Weems, Charles Gaines, you name it. You name them. I met them, and mostly through Thelma, and learning about the art world in LA. Peter and I didn't know anything. We were just bumbling along. We liked this art. I mean, Lorna was in school. Weren't you in school still when we met you? No. Okay.
Lorna,
Yeah, right, yeah.
But anyway, she was very young. I mean, yeah.
Well, I'd like to correct it. I don't think you were bumbling. There was a lot of intention in the way you collected, a lot of intention in the philanthropy. The curator grants that many of us were lucky to receive from the foundation that you and your former husband had together gave a lot of us a lot of opportunity to make acquisitions for our institutions in ways that would never have happened. I think equally the support of exhibitions, My Black Male, and so many others, that when we think about the 90s, critical, important, significant, right, work that happened that made today possible. So I think when you say, how does it feel? I feel in some ways very grateful.
Well, good.
For what that vision was then, because it's what makes so much of when we look today, right, and can see all the many things that are happening. These are all occurrences that were wished for, hoped for, right? With the strategy, with the intention, with the care, and with the love with which you went about the philanthropy and the art collecting.
And now what's really interesting, and Thelma, you remain at the center of this discourse, there are so many Black collectors now.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
they
right.
are.
I mean, the number and it's almost like you can see the arc
Right.
Right.
of Eileen and Peggy Cooper Cafritz
Right.
all the way to Pamela Joyner. I mean, the
Right.
whole,
Yes.
it's amazing.
Trajectory.
Yeah.
And I think what it represents in many ways is a history of collecting by African Americans that, you know, Eileen and Peggy and others sit in the middle of, because we had much of it in the early century when no one, right, was buying the work. That most of the work by Black artists was being collected by Black institutions, HBCU museums, Black museums, or individuals who all had the vision that, yes, one day museums would include these artists, but
Right.
they collected and stewarded. And then when we get to the late 20th century and we think of the work that was being made then, that sort of post-60s period into this century, and you look at the way you collected, it was also, again, ahead of the moment that art history, right, opens up and then, of course, sees and recognizes these artists. So it's a very critical place of transformation that your vision has been so critical to making happen.
And this idea, as you recount that history of how collectors like Eileen and Peter and Peggy and moved work, and because they had some authority and agency. Because, for example, as you know from the Harlem Renaissance show, brilliant Denise Morell's show, the number of works in that show that are now heralded, that were rejected
Exactly.
by museums, including the Metropolitan
Exactly.
Museum. And as we've heard from those family members
Exactly.
who had them literally in their closets because the HBCUs were the only museums that would take them.
But that was even into the 90s. I mean, that's why the curator grants were so amazing, because it made it possible to acquire works that in those days probably would not have gotten past most acquisition committees.
Right.
Right? But coming into the room with support for the work made it possible for many of us to acquire works in such a significant way. And, you know, I think that we can't look at this moment where we all revel in the fact that we can go in museums all over and see the work of Black artists and women artists and queer artists and artists who used to be known as regional, all the ways that, you know, Eileen has collected, and to see that as a norm now, right? We have to understand like how that happened.
Questions for... We have time, I'm being told by the timekeeper, for 2 questions. And if you, please, you need to go to the microphones there. And actually, we have traveling mics, so you can,
Yeah. And there's one.
All right, first of all,
And
the
here.
top, you're bringing out the crow in me, the sparkling. I'm just curious, because both you know art so well. What is it like in your travels, you go to a museum and you see something paired with something that you never thought would go so well together? It just shocked you. For example, when I went to the Newark Museum, seeing what they did with the Greek slave, and then surrounding her with wallpaper that was screened with abolitionist. So they're looking at her. It was so unexpected and jolting. So what have you seen in your travels that just, you didn't expect that pairing?
great question.
Yes.
It is.
Pairings that you've seen in your travels that were unexpected but brought you delight or awe or...
Yeah, you know what? It's a fantastic question, and I think for me that happens often. So I don't know that I have an answer, but I guess I can say in an answer what I do have is an appreciation for it. Because my way of understanding how I understand art comes in that looking. And there are many works or ideas around work that I think I know and I understand. And often the space in which I realize I don't understand it is when I encounter those pairings, right? And it makes me look differently, look anew, and think differently, even about works that I know. This happens often when works from our collection at the Studio Museum are borrowed for exhibitions. And then we get invited to the opening, and I go to the opening, and I see a work that's super familiar, right? It's like, something like your clothes, like when you see someone else wearing it, it looks different. That's completely how it is. I'll walk into other museums, and I'll see our work, but the way in which it's hung, what it's around, and I think, there have been times when I've seen our work, and I don't remember it's our, and I think, oh my God, that's such an amazing work. And it's ours. But because of the way in which, the context, it changes it. And that's what I think the beauty, right, of having long-term relationships with art can be.
Eileen, anything on that question?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question here. Thank you, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Brighton. Before I ask my question, I would like to preface this by saying I'm a student in the Darren Walker University for Social Justice.
Oh my God.
And I would like to find out, to me, you're both luminaries. You've accomplished so much. When you face the world's seemingly insurmountable challenges, where do you find the inspiration to continue doing the work you do? Thank you.
Where did you find the inspiration?
That's a lovely question. Thank you. Just from doing what we like to do, we enjoyed meeting artists, we enjoyed looking at art, we enjoyed knowing curators, directors. I mean, we enjoyed meeting new people and befriending people that were not our mainstream friends. I was an elementary school teacher, and he was a software person. Well, we were kind of boring, so we found these artists that were, had a more expansive view of the world. They gave us a different outlook on the world. We could be more, and that's what my mother and my son Michael would always, encourage and push me to be more, to be more expansive, more aware of the world. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think in complicated times, I think I always sort of ground in art, not just the visual art that is, the stock and trade of what I do, but the arts generally. It's why they are so important to me, and why so much of what I think about my work on the one hand is as a curator, but it's also about, sort of creating the opportunity for audiences to engage with art. It's why I believe so deeply in museums, right? In creating not just the physical space for our engagement with art, but, really, if I dare say, spiritual space, right? To, in this complicated world, to have the space to encounter ourselves and each other, but grounded, in the vision of artists.
Final words from the two of you. Eileen, what do you hope is your legacy? You are clearly, it's incontrovertible. You have a singular legacy as a collector, as a promoter of giving real status to and stature to the artists, so many artists. Is that what you hope your legacy is?
Yes, that's the beginning of it. And yes, sharing it with others, the education, the beingness, the enjoyment of the arts, as Thelma was saying. And that's why I'm donating books to colleges, HBCUs, junior colleges, high schools, to be a resource, an educational resource, to bring art.
Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you.
And Thelma Golden,
Yes.
you have been on a mission to leave in Harlem a new home for the Studio Museum in Harlem on 125th Street. Would you like to share that vision and where we are with
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
You know, I would, because as you know, Darren, I've been at the Studio Museum for 24 years. And in that time, it has been, you know, my privilege, it's been my honor to be able to think about what the Studio Museum is and can be. And for the last 10 years, what that has meant has been building our new home, our first purpose-built building in the museum's 56-year history, a building that rises to what has always been the sort of programmatic ambition of the institution, a project that wouldn't be possible without all kinds of support, but in this room, I will start with the support that has come from the Ford Foundation, a place that, no, wait. Let's talk about, you know, why institutions exist. You know, there are many museums in this country that are the full sum of an individual's collection and their fortune to make that museum. That was not the Studio Museum at its founding. Studio Museum was a group of people who were deeply culturally rich, but without resources. And from our beginning, the Ford Foundation has been a supporter of the Studio Museum and made it possible for us to continue to grow. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. But really, what has been going on is this idea of creating this physical space for the Studio Museum. But in terms of what's going on now is that we are working steadily to be back open, ready to receive audiences in the future. That's what we are doing, and it's incredibly exciting. I am grateful for what it has meant to have our audiences, the artists that we engage and collaborate with, the supporters like yourself, like Dr. Alexander at the Mellon Foundation, so many others who have been there with us, trying to create a new paradigm for Black institutions. So, you know, when you think about legacy, you know, I mean, certainly for some people, perhaps my legacy will be this building, and I'm deeply proud of that. But I think, you know, again, when I think of what I want my legacy to be, it is, again, inspired very much by Eileen, in that I hope my legacy is that through my work, I have made space for artists.
On that note, please join me in thanking Thelma Golden and Eileen Harris Norton.
No, we want them so they can take your picture. Thank you all.
Thank